Look at almost any religious tradition around the world, and you will find a demand for absolute, unblemished purity. To approach the divine, you must be physically clean, the offerings must be pristine, and the rituals must be executed without a single flaw. There is a deep, ingrained human anxiety driving this. We operate under the assumption that the divine is easily offended, and that the slightest contamination or misstep in our worship is a direct insult to God. But if you travel to the ancient spiritual landscape of Vrindavan, the rigid rules of the temple give way to something entirely different. This is the historic heart of the Radha Krishna tradition. Here, the ultimate currency is not the precise execution of a flawless ritual. The highest form of worship is wild, vibrant, and completely unconditional love. This environment creates a friction point. When devotion is the ultimate law, the strictest boundaries of religious purity become vulnerable to acts of extreme love. Centuries ago, an ascetic named Madhav Das lived deep within the thickets of Vrindavan. He was a saint who lived so far outside the bounds of conventional worship that his daily practices would shock a traditional priest. Madhav Das saw Krishna breathing within every traveler, every pilgrim, and every animal. For him, the divine was the physical reality of every living being he met. Because of this, his daily ritual was deeply unorthodox. He would wait for visiting saints to finish their meals at the local ashrams, and then he would gather their discarded, half-eaten leftovers to offer to his god. To anyone else, a plate touched by another person's saliva was contaminated garbage. But to Madhav Das, because these saints carried the divine within them, their leftovers were the absolute highest, most sacred offering a human being could possibly present. He had completely dismantled the traditional religious binary of clean versus unclean, applying the logic of devotion to its absolute, unyielding extreme. This extreme worldview eventually caught up with him. On one afternoon, suffering from intense biological hunger, Madhav Das hurriedly scraped together a leaf plate of these leftover portions. Driven by that raw biological urge, he made a split-second error. Without thinking, he lifted the gathered food and put it directly into his own mouth, completely forgetting that he hadn't yet offered the meal to his god. The realization hit him instantly. His jaws locked, every muscle froze in a state of absolute panic as he recognized what he had just done. He couldn't swallow the food. To consume a meal before feeding the divine was a supreme act of disrespect, an unthinkable breach of his devotion. But he also couldn't spit it out. These were the sacred leftovers of the holy saints. Spitting them onto the dirt would be an unforgivable desecration of the people he revered most. His profound respect for both humanity and the divine collided, short-circuiting his own biological functions. He was trapped in an impossible stalemate. Evening slowly fell over the forest, and Madhav Das remained sitting perfectly still. The unchewed food simply rested on his tongue. The physical discomfort of holding a mouthful of food for hours without swallowing is immense, but for him it was entirely eclipsed by a crushing, overwhelming sense of spiritual guilt. He sat through the pitch-black night, completely silent, utterly unmoving, as a steady stream of tears poured down his face. When the sun finally rose, casting morning light over the forest, he was still locked in that exact same agonizing position. The biological survival instinct had been fully suspended. By sunrise, his physical existence had become secondary to a total internal crisis of devotion. As morning broke, the breaking point arrived. According to the tradition, Krishna physically manifested, appearing right in front of the weeping, paralyzed saint. Krishna didn't tell Madhav Das to spit the food out, and he didn't demand a fresh, clean meal. He asked for the very chewed, saliva-soaked food trapped inside the saint's mouth. Consumed by deep shame, Madhav Das shook his head. He refused to give his own defiled leftovers to his god, sobbing violently but entirely unable to speak. The sheer force of his tears caused his lips to part a fraction, and a single chewed grain of rice fell from his mouth. Krishna immediately caught that fallen grain in his hand, ate it, and vanished. The divine acceptance ignored the contamination entirely. The weight of his agonizing sincerity had effectively rewritten the laws of what was considered an acceptable offering. This same prioritization of the internal state defines the core legend of Vrindavan. the separation of Radha and Krishna. When Krishna left for the city of Mathura, Radha remained in the forest, yet she never truly lost him. She maintained a perfect union by replacing his physical presence with a constant, vivid internal devotion. Madhav Das followed this same logic. Just as distance couldn't break Radha's connection, physical impurity couldn't block the saint's offering. In this tradition, the physical world, whether measured in miles or in cleanliness, is simply an illusion that devotion can pierce. This is the essence of what this tradition calls Bhaav, pure, unconditional emotional intent. The universe does not consume matter, it only consumes Bhaav. We spend thousands of years obsessing over flawless rituals, perfect rules, and presenting the most pristine offerings. But in the end, the divine is really only hungry for the unpolished, messy truth of human intent.